If you would open up your Bibles to the book of Acts in chapter 8 in verse 1. The book of Acts, chapter 8, verse 1. Let me say first, I want to say thank you on behalf of all the people in the Ukraine for all of you working so hard in order to fill up this trailer and possibly the truck that I have. Some of you will say, well, what will happen to these goods? Well, by tomorrow, they will be in Judsonia, Arkansas. And by the end of the week, it'll be on a container headed then down to the Gulf Coast, and there it'll board a ship, and there it will go ahead and make its way to the Ukraine. If the people were here from the Ukraine, they would say to each and every one of you, Spasiba Большое. Thank you very, very much. I'm humbled by the fact that I'm able to come here and to tell you a little bit about the work. In Acts chapter 13 and 14, it says when missionaries are sent out, they should come back and they should rehearse. They should tell the people all the things that are going on. It's good to see that we've got Sister Schultz here. I've never ever worked in India when she was there, but I have worked in the region of Kakinada and places like this. So the Lord has caused our paths to cross many times. And one of the people that was one of my church members when I was 22 years of age, and her preacher used to live in Winona. Jane would go ahead and work with the Schultz and was so excited. And I was able to see her this past Sunday night. It's good to see people from Yazoo City. These are like brothers and like sisters, and they're just as dear to me as family. I'm sorry my wife was not able to come. She had a terrible shock this past week. She discovered she had been married to me 49 years. On August the 28th, and she's not over it yet. And so y'all just be mindful of her. These containers, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it, but I started working in the Ukraine in 1984, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there was a group of us from Harding University that went to Donetsk. And we went ahead and we preached the gospel every night. We taught people. They would come to us. We didn't go to them. They would come to us. And we had 1,500 baptisms in the 10 days that we were there. Established 10 congregations. And now whenever you see the terrible persecution, this is where it is centered. I want to read just a few verses from Acts chapter 8 to let you know that this should not be a surprise to us or to anyone else on the mission field. Acts chapter 8, verse 1. And Saul was consenting unto his death. And at that time there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem. And they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house, and hailing men and women, committing them to prison. Therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. We had something that felt like New Testament Christianity, felt like a Pentecost in Donetsk. It was in June of 1984, 20 years ago. And I'll never forget one lady coming up to me and she said, Brother Morgan, work fast. She said, because if you don't fill my people's heart with the Lord, Sylvester Stallone will fill their hearts with something else. Now, y'all didn't know Sylvester Stallone was a missionary, did you? Well, he's not. And for a minute, I didn't really grasp exactly what she was saying about Sylvester Stallone. But then as I began to walk through the city, I saw these little kiosks. And they were showing back then, it was VCRs of Rocky 1, Rocky 2, and Rocky 3. And she was saying, if you don't fill their hearts. She said before, their hearts were filled with communism. But now that communism is gone, she said, my people's hearts are empty and they're receptive to the Word of God. And they were. 1,500 of them were baptized. And I've been working ever since in the country of Donetsk as a missionary there. I've worked in 56 different foreign countries. Lord has given me an opportunity not many people have had to be able to do the thing that they love the most. I didn't say that this is what I do the best. Now, when you look at the map, if you look at the extreme left-hand corner, okay, someone asked me if I knew about J.C. Enlow, and I said, yes, J.C. Enlow works in Dnepropetrovsk. If you look under the R.A., the first word you see is Pavlograd. Then you look under that in bolder type, that's Dnepropetrovsk. That's where he had worked. We've got a preacher training school there. But if you follow the river as it makes its way from the bottom left-hand side, that's the Dnieper River that goes ahead and basically divides the country in some ways from the east and the west. And if you follow it all the way till it runs out on the left-hand side, there's a word there called Kremenchuk. And this is where I've worked since about 98. For a while, I was with a team, and I would go places, and we just teach preachers how to preach. And when I was in this city of Kremenchuk teaching in the Bible school, somebody said, Brother Morgan, would you come to the orphanage? And would you go ahead and do something to entertain the children? I'd do a little magic. And so I do this, and so they said, I said, sure, I will go. So when I get there, and there is a side of me that perhaps, I tell people my mother dropped me on my head when I was a boy. And they said, well, how did that happen? I said, well, she was coming up from the cellar. And she had me under one arm. And she had a jar of sauerkraut under the other arm. And she slipped. And she had to drop one or the other. Years later, I said, Mom, surely you didn't drop me instead of the sauerkraut. She said, son, I worked all summer putting that sauerkraut up, you know. So anyway, I'm there in front of all these children at the orphanage. And I say, now I'm going to do a magic show. And then I'm going to tell you about the Lord. Now when I complete my magic show, I'll tell you how I do any trick. And that's all they are. I have no powers. Only the Lord has powers. I just have tricks. But there's one little catch. If I tell you how I do this trick, I've got to kill every one of you so the trick doesn't get out. And so it's a magician's code. And they giggled and said, that's the silliest old man I've ever seen. So I do my little magic show, and I said, all right, who's got a question? A little girl named Marina, wearing just panties and a T-shirt. Her parents had thrown her in the river there, tried to kill her, that same Dnieper River. And I said, Marina, what a brave soul. What is your question? Will you be my daddy? And let me be your little girl. Well, it was a brave question. I couldn't tell her no, but I also couldn't tell her yes. So I made this commitment. I said, you know what I'll do? I'll just take care of all of you right here. And that's how I started working there instead of going from place to place, teaching people how to preach. And this is going to be real interesting if I can't get my computer to work better than it's working right now. I may have to have some assistance. If not, okay. I hope that's not the way it's going to work. We'll work it. And I hope I'm not in your way. Okay. Remember what I said in Acts chapter 8, verse 1? There was terrible persecution. Some people said, Brother Morgan, I just don't know if that persecution that they talk about on CNN is really as bad as what they show. You think it is? By the way, this is somebody, would you knock the lights off at the back so the shot will be a little better? This is the city of Kiev, capital city of the Ukraine, and it is in the very, very western portion of the city. And when I would fly into Kiev, which is where I flew into, I would go ahead and spend the night, usually at one of those hotels, until I could go ahead and catch a train to ride it to my point where I would be going. This is where the revolution started. The people were protesting. And some people say, well, is it that bad? Ask the people on the other side of that gun just how bad they think it might be. Now, I'll try not to let these slides be too graphic, but some people say, Brother Morgan, is the persecution there real? Yeah, it's very much real. Sometimes you'll see a flag that'll be blue and yellow. That means it's Ukraine or the Ukraine's flag. That's some of their soldiers there. And when I was there, I've been there twice. People said, since the war has started, have you been back? Only twice. And while I was there this last time, as I would pass the fields full of the sunflowers, they were setting up tanks, they were setting up rocket launchers. And this particular rocket launcher shows some of interest because there you see Malaysian Airlines. If you look at the lower portion of this, you can read that's the actual plane that was shot down. Now, I've never flown Malaysian Airlines, but I've flown over that spot. I don't need any light up here. You just judge yourself as to how much light you want us to have. But that is the actual crash site, but I've driven right by it where it happened. Those were some of the actual bodies that were taken from the fields there after a couple days of political lingering. And this is in Donetsk. The tanks are coming in from one side with Ukrainian forces, and we've got, for a while, Russian denied that they were any Russians in there. One of the ladies that writes to me said, I went down with my scythe, handheld cutting instrument, to go ahead and cut some grass near the river. And she said, I saw there was a stack of bodies there, but one of those bodies groaned. And she said, I was able to get him up on my cart and get him back to my home. And at that time, she didn't know if he was Russian or Ukrainian. And people were saying one way or the other, you'll be killed because of your interfering. And speaking of interfering, here's a protester. You know, when we have protests in the United States, people will go ahead and the policeman will put their hand on the head and say, be careful there as you get in the car. When the Russians or the Ukrainians, either one, put you in a police car, they're whipping you the entire time. And this lady's in a heap of trouble because of protests that she's made. And you might say, how does this compare with what goes on in, say, Iraq? Places like that. As far as I'm concerned, if you're killed in one, it's not a lot different than being killed in the other. It's nothing uncommon for the insurgents to cut limbs off, hands off, arms off, feet off, in order to go ahead and to send out a signal to the people, don't resist us. This looks like a fairly peaceful protest unless you're the individual that got hit in the head there. And obviously it isn't. One of the things that amazes me, because I am a man with guns, I carry a concealed weapons permit, relax. I don't have a weapon on me, but whenever we had that terrible killing in Yazoo City, what was it? 25 years ago, that murder, I went out and bought a pistol to protect my wife. No one in the Ukraine has a pistol. No one has a rifle. No one has a shotgun. So when the people, the citizenry has weapons, they've stolen them or they've been given them. And some people are going to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, as this individual was, as he was being shot and his hat's flying off. One of the things that whenever we were having the protests in China, and I remember then that this one young girl walking in front of the tanks, and when the tanks would go to the left, she would go, excuse me for getting in your way, when she'd go to the left. When they'd go to the right, she would go to the right. And this woman said, hey, I just got to go to work. Somebody asked me when I came back, and I was there whenever they came into Crimea the first time and then went back later. They said, what's it like being there during the war? And I said, well, men get up and they go to work. Women, they go to the garden. Children, they go to school. And life has to go on. Now, it's terrible on the soldiers and terrible on the innocent victims, but life does go on even in these horrendous times. And here you see people evacuating the city. We've been told that 1 million people have been forced from eastern Ukraine. And they're making their way, some by foot, some by train, some by bus, and some by car. Now, this is a land where only 3% of the people had cars. So not many of them have the opportunity to take that route. So most just have to walk, hoping somebody will give them a ride. what I am doing with your buckets. We've got 135,000 that are living in tents. And we've been told that there's an estimated 44,000 babies and children that are also living in those tents. So what we're trying to do is, if you were living in that tent, what would you want me to do? What would you want you to do? I think you'd want us to come to your aid, not be like the priest in the story of the Good Samaritan and walk by on the other side. Not be like the Levite and walk by on the other side, but to come to your aid. And not only come to your aid, but do whatever's necessary to help you. My wife and I lived in Rostov-na-Don, Russia in 1996 and 1997. And while we were there, we lived in an apartment building very, very similar to this one, except that's small. While General Eisenhower, when he was elected president, he was building an interstate system. And Khrushchev at the same time was building flats, apartment buildings. Ours was 10 stories high. We lived on the 7th story. They said I lived on the 6th floor, but they just count when the first one's the first one you walk to. Now, if it's 7 of them up there, that's where I live, on the 7th floor. But it looked exactly like that. But we were wealthy, very wealthy, because we had everything that we needed to have. Donna and I had to make a decision. Do we take everything or nothing? We opted for nothing. It took me 6 months to find one blanket in the city. We had nothing. And so we slept under our coats for a good while. A lot of people smoke in the Ukraine, and this man's house is smoking. So we're preparing these people, because most of them, that's how they're living. Their clothes were burned, and so in most of the buckets, we're going to have a change of underclothing. We're going to have T-shirts. Now, we also are sending out lots more stuff. We'll have, this past week, we sent out from Eagle Lake, Texas, we sent out a container containing 44,500 pounds of rice. We also sent out from Memphis, Tennessee, medical supplies. Every time St. Jude's buys something new, you know who gets the old stuff? We do. We do. And so we get it, we send them. I had a dentist in Pocahontas, Arkansas call me, and he said, could you use a dental office? I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm talking about my entire practice. I have 4 offices, and you can have everything, every chair, every x-ray machine. X-ray machines, I found out, Carlos, weigh 800 pounds. And all I carried was, I didn't carry enough. To go ahead, but we moved it all. A doctor from Nashville volunteered to carry it over for us. A week ago Monday, we had a nursing home at Pine Bluff, Arkansas with 100,000 square feet that said, we've sold our building, we're out of business, we'll give you everything there provided you move it out in one day. You know what we said? No problem. About 25 of us centered in on Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and by night time, the building was empty. The people have nothing. That's the reason we take beds, and that's the reason we take mattresses. I had a nursing home in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. They bought all new mattresses, and they gave me their old ones. They'd been covered and protected, so it's fine. But what am I going to say to this young girl when she says, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Now, this lady, most people live in apartment buildings, but she lived in what would be called a dacha. A lot of the elderly people, they leave the apartment buildings and they go out and build something. You'd call it a shack. But at least they have a piece of land there. And they will put up little stakes and said, you can have 10 feet of this for a garden. And you can have 10 feet, and you can have 10 feet. And everything that she had there, usually they don't have electricity. And usually they don't have running water. So everything she had's been destroyed. But you know, this is a wealthy family here. losing everything they have. And they were, how they're getting this mattress out, I have no idea. But anyway, it just shows that they were wealthy and they were able to get some things out. This lady got nothing. I can see her just saying, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And this lady, if I were to describe the people, I would say most of the people, they would say then, I have no hope. I have no hope. Well, this is one of the things we're trying to do. That's a typical situation there. The people, everything they have is being destroyed. And one of the first things the Russians did was, Putin did this by his own mission. He cut off the supply of gas to the Ukraine, to the entire Ukraine. Now, people use steam heat, but it's going to be a cold, harsh winter. And so this lady has nothing to cook with inside her flat. Even though her flat is still intact, she's cooking out. And that's one of the reasons I've asked people, because somebody will say, hey, if you'll go get some cabbage, if you'll go get some carrots, I'll get a piece of fat meat and we'll make some borscht and we'll get by. So we're putting spoons in there, we're putting bowls in there. This young lady, all she's doing is just saying, maybe I can find some clothing. Maybe I can find some clothing. They love their animals. And it's a great tragedy to this man because he's lost his German Shepherd. But it's very important to him. These ladies, what am I going to say to people like this when they say, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? These people, they're just getting out with their lives. And I think you can see they're probably thankful just to get out with their lives. But these are the people, I think you can see, if you didn't know it before, these people are suffering from terrible persecution. Now, the Ukraine and Russia, they've never had good public relations agents. During World War II, there were 6 former Soviet Union members killed for every Jew in Germany, 6 for every one. But nobody talk about that much, do they? And don't get me wrong, I'm not underplaying the sadness of the Holocaust. It was horrific, but I just want you to know it was more horrific in some other places. And right now, not much is being said about what's going on there on a daily basis. This city of Donetsk, where we established 10 congregations, baptized 1,500, this is the city. And a lot of people are saying it's more like a ghost town. And this mama is saying, where's my boy? Has anybody seen my boy? Has anybody seen my boy? I don't know where my boy is. He's not come back. And has anybody seen my boy? When Donna and I lived in Rostov-na-Don, which is in Russia, but it's on the Ukrainian border, we did not meet one single person that had not lost a husband or a father or a brother or a son. Now, it's not something you just heard about somewhere else. Everybody. And I don't know if that's her son or not. I hope not. He's not coming back home. So first of all, we saw that the people were persecuted and they're scattered. And one of the first things that the people, when I stay in daily touch with them by email as much as I can, but we have to be very careful, because when people discover that these are Christians, they're going to be persecuted even more. And yes, people are intercepting messages by email. That's a very common sign. Somebody made these up and handed them out that simply says, don't kill us. Don't kill us. I told you only 3% of the people have cars. And so they gather their goods and they start out. Thankfully, the people don't have big families. When my wife and I lived in Rostov-na-Don, the thing that probably impressed us the most was find somebody with 2 children. Now, on my family farm outside of Piggott, Arkansas, halfway between Piggott and Kennett, Missouri, my mother and father had 7 children. Mother had 2 brothers living on the farm that had 10 children each. So in that one farm, we had 27 children there. But for the Russians and the Ukrainians, an average of 1. The average Ukrainian woman has had 7 abortions. I baptized a lady that had her 16th abortion. And I know I've had doctors say you cannot conceive after that many abortions. Tell that to the woman who was filling the baptistry with blood as I was baptizing her. It was terrible before. 1/2 of all girls before they graduate from high school have had sex for pay. 1/2. The business deal was initiated by their birth father. Now, I've worked with 10 orphanages over the years, and I'm so careful about not touching those girls for fear that they might say, here's a man that brings money in, here's a man that brings in goods in, for fear that they might misunderstand. Because 100% of those. I'll never forget a little girl named Marina Lomonosov. She came to me and said, can I help you? She was at the orphanage, and the orphanage there was one of the first orphanages started working in the city of Kremenchuk. And one of the Christians said, Brother Morgan, this little girl deserves help. Now I want you to know something. Don't picture a Mississippi orphanage and say, well, I know what orphanages are like. Don't think you do. Don't think you do. First of all, over half of ours are biological. Half. That means if we've got 200 orphans, 100 of them are kin to nobody on the face of this earth. Their mother was killed, their father was killed, their grandmother was killed, and their grandfather was killed, and they have no brothers and sisters. She was in that lot. And they said, she's the smartest child we have in this orphanage, the best. And was so sexually abused, she needs surgery. Well, I paid for the surgery. And see, are y'all doing anything later for about 3 hours? Because I could tell y'all stories for about 3 hours and never repeat myself. Remember, I was preaching at Bono, Arkansas one night. I'll get back to Maria in just a minute. But I'll just finish her story. They said, Brother Morgan, she deserves to go to the university. She completed a master's degree in the university, and I was able to help her and pay the way for her to do that. And now she's back there at that same orphanage teaching. Okay, back to Bono. And back to the fact that our orphanages aren't like your orphanages. One, we have a minimum of 25 children in a room. If you lay in bed, you can touch 8 different people with your foot and with your other foot and with this hand, with that hand, with your head, and they're going to touch you. We have to have guards. We have to have guards that stay with them 24 hours a day, because not all of our boys are good boys that come into these orphanages. Let me tell you something else. 1 out of every 10 attempt suicide. 1 out of every 10 has to be taken to another orphanage we call the sanatorium, because her life is being so bad. This one boy ran away. If you have to have dental work, a lot of times they say, well, your teeth are ugly, and I know how to whiten those up, grind everything off with no Novocaine, no numbness. The boy ran away. They found him in the snow. I'm preaching at Bono. I'm getting ready to get to the pulpit, and I leave my phone on. If it's with me, it's on. Because when people call me, they want to get hold of me. And they said, Brother Morgan, we need you to make a decision. They said this boy, Sergey, has gone ahead and he has run away. They found him. And we believe his arms, both arms have gangrene. We believe both legs have gangrene. And the doctors want to go ahead and they want to amputate both legs and both arms. Will you agree to be financially responsible for that surgery? I've done surgery, but a lot of times I say no. We had a little girl, they wanted to clip her spinal column at the neck, where she would be on a ventilator for the rest of her life. She's about 10. And I said no to that surgery. Was not needful. Now she's paralyzed from waist down, but that's a big difference between the two. And when we sent in the first wheelchairs they'd ever seen to that orphanage, she crawled on the floor and showed people how to use them. Now back to this boy. I said, what? They said, we want you to approve. The doctor's right here, the surgeon's right here, and he wants to go ahead and to take off both legs and both arms and just leave his trunk and his head. I said, excuse me, I got to go to the bathroom. And I was gagging. I said, Lord, please do not put this on me that I have to go ahead and make that kind of decision. And I said, if he dies, let him die. but I will not do that to him. Sister Schultz, when I used to take medical supplies into India, and I used to take some children diabetic supplies, I was not able to. I didn't get the message. The parents took that child that had gangrene in the foot and put the foot on a railroad track and did their own amputation. When I came back to Piggott, Arkansas, I said, I'm not believing this. That was amputation with a train. Very common, they said, in third world countries, and much more humane than a saw. No, not everybody lives like y'all do. This little child telling the dad, bye, doesn't live like y'all. This little boy being kissed by his grandmother as he and his mother are fleeing away, don't. This little boy with his head pressed against the window as he's trying to get away. This little girl, no, she may look like it. She didn't look like. My mother died when I was 20-something, Carlos. If she were here, she'd say, Jerry, that's me. My mother was part Indian, and she never thought she was an attractive woman. I did, but she didn't. And she had high cheekbones like that and dark hair like that. That woman will never be the same. In the Titanic, remember the thing was, women and children, men don't try to get in the lifeboat. This man got on the train. He's got on an old military uniform, and he's scared to death. Somebody's going to yank him off and say, you shouldn't be there. You're taking up a woman's spot. You're taking up a child's spot. Some went by train. I've traveled that, and that's obviously a cargo train, but this is in Rostov-na-Don, where I used to live. And if you see the Russian flag, the red, white, and blue, you see the Red Cross there. They're telling people, you ought to stay away. Leave this to us. That's what it's like to live in these tents. I put on my list of my buckets, if you put in a clothesline, clothespins, and that's why. Man, I've seen a lot of people that have never seen a crutch, and he's got 2 pairs. That's what's amazing me when I see that slide. The elderly, it's difficult on them. It's difficult on the children. Little boys that suddenly are men. Let me tell you something. Women are more resilient than men. That woman's going to make it. She has to, because that's her baby. And she's going to live even though she may not want to live because of that baby. And that's her husband. He's no longer the protector. He's no longer the provider. In his eyes, he is nothing. I worry about him. I worry about him. That little boy will never be the same. That little boy, I just like him. I don't know what his name is, but I like him. Because I've seen that look before. He said, Mama, we're going to make it. If I have to go ahead and hire out to pick potatoes in the fields, I'll do it. If I have to go ahead and go to work at a coal mine, I'll do it. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of sister. And I believe he will. There's the one nobody took care of. And again, don't kill us. I've been an elder for the Piggott Church of Christ, South Thornton Street Church of Christ, twice since 1993 at different intervals. I would sometimes, when I lived in Russia, we had to step down. You don't need a local priest. Anyway, enough on that. But I've been their elder twice. I stepped down after 2 terms, poor choice of words there, because I said on December the 31st, I've got to work the hardest I've ever worked in my life in the Ukraine, because calamity is coming. I raised every dime I could to print Bibles. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Eastern European missions. I don't have their budget, okay? But I was buying Bibles for $3 a piece, whole Bibles, printed in their language, and with a translation that was checked by biblical scholars of our brotherhood and verified. Now, somebody got there in this area, started passing out just portions of the book of Luke. I bought 5,000 Bibles, had to pay this time $5 each, that's $25,000, because that's the power. I'd rather have one Bible there than me. If there was just a choice, the only hope this woman's got is found in the Word of God. What do these people look like? You, don't they? I put a little bit of a toy in every bucket that we put there. Little boys have to become men. I don't think the girl on your left is particularly happy who's taking care of her, but that's the way it is sometimes. This little girl's a new orphan. Has no longer a mother or a father. These little children, any place will do that's safe. That just means medicine. And we've seen in medicine, births still happen in the midst of war. Babies still are hurt. Some have to have surgery. Some stand in line for long hours for food. One of the things I liked about the bucket, and you don't have to all have a bucket, but I wanted there to be enough bucket where people could get water. Now, I told you a fellow from Eagle Lake, Texas contributed 44,000 pounds of rice. Johnson & Johnson said, I'll give you 3 truckloads full of sanitation supplies if y'all will pay the shipping costs and send them. Somebody in Cincinnati, Ohio says, I'll give you water purification packets for individual, enough to do 180,000 gallons of water. Another fellow says, I'll give you 30,000 protein packets to put. So in addition to what we're sending in those buckets, those alone won't do it. But everything together will keep kids, hopefully, out of the garbage cans. This lady here is picking up grain. Say, not very profitable, but if it's between you and starvation, you'd get on your knees and join her. I have one orphanage. Would you tell me what time it is? I don't have my wristwatch.
6:55.
Okay, I'm nearly through. We have one orphanage. We had 20 children that had lived in the gutter. You know, I'm talking about the subterranean gutter. And they did, and they survived because they were in freezing temperatures above ground, but it was warm below ground. Children, they survive. They'll pick a place and stick together and do whatever they have to do. Some will make it, some won't make it. This little girl says, my dad's name was Leonard. My dad's name was Leonard. Now you may say, this was not from the Ukraine. Oh, yes, it was. Well, this is not a recent picture. No, it isn't. This is what happens when this is what happens when, in the story of the Good Samaritan, everybody passes by on the other side. This was from World War II. Very common. When Stalin wanted what a village had, he just encircled it until the people starved to death. Not a good man at all. You can turn the lights back on. That's the last slide. In the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17, and I think about verse 45. It's a story of David, and it's a story of Goliath. And I love this story because people come to me all the time and say, Brother Morgan, that's Russia that in a way you're going up against. They are a giant. Yes, they are. And you're not even a David. No, I'm not. But you know, in that beautiful story of David and Goliath, I love this story because Goliath One, there were three ways to fight back then. You either had to fight infantry. Goliath could not be defeated by the infantry. Or you could be the cavalry. David didn't have a horse, and so that was not a method for him. The other was artillery. Oh, he had artillery. He could sling a slingshot. In the Old Testament, it talked about 700 slingers that could put a rock within a hair's breadth of their target. From 200 yards away, they could kill an animal. So Goliath comes storming out with his javelin. He comes storming out with his spear, just almost thundering the ground with his sword. And he's got an armor bearer. And he looks up on the hill, and there is David. And he says, y'all think I'm a dog that you would send out somebody with sticks? First of all, Goliath, I don't know what your problem is. David just had one stick, not sticks. So some people have said Goliath had vision problems. Well, Goliath kept saying, come to me, come to me. David had no intentions. Now, Saul intended for David to come to him. He wanted to put the same kind of armor that Goliath had. But David said, I don't need that. I've been your armor bearer before, and I don't need that. But when Goliath said, you come to me with sticks, he said, no. I come to you with the armies of the Lord. Now, I'm a country boy. And if I'd been there, I'd have looked around and I said, David, you're seeing something I don't see. I see Israel's army. Where's the other army? See? Now, how are we going to help these people? One, I've got 5,000 Bibles in their language that will go into those packs for the first people. And we're printing more Bibles in the midst of this. But we're going to do it by the power of God's armies. It won't be because President Obama, and I'm not a politician, does something. It won't be because the U.S. has done something. It'll be because Almighty God does something. These are His children, folks. He loves them just as much as He loves us. Now, do you want to serve this God? If you've never repented of your sins, been buried with Christ in water's baptism, if you need the prayers of the congregation some way, just come. Our brother's going to lead us in a song of encouragement, and I beg you to come as we stand, as we sing.